Welcome to Listening with China Blue. This is a podcast that focuses on how listening not only informs us about what is occurring in the world around us, but also helps us connect with others, build stronger businesses, strengthens our mental health, and become more creative and compassionate individuals. As more and more people practice attentive listening in a community, it becomes a community building practice that strengthens our mental health as we learn from our neighbors. I will be interviewing people from all walks of life to learn how listening has informed them in their field and helped them to make intelligent decisions. They will be artists, musicians, composers, dancers, business people, psychologists, neuroscientists, and Buddhists, to name a few. About me, I'm an internationally exhibiting sound-based artist. In my work, Discovering Unheard Sounds, I realized that the core component that drove my work was simply listening. That realization put me on the path of speaking about and helping people learn to become better listeners. I began with leading sound walks, which I continue to do in the upstate New York region to help people learn to listen from nature. And now, tune your ears to this podcast to learn about the power of listening. And do pay attention until the end for further information on how to start your own listening practice, share it with others, and to support listening with China Blue. Today we are speaking with Professor Stephanie Loveless, who is a sound and media artist whose research centers on listening and vocal embodiment. Her recent projects include a mobile web app for geo-located listening and sound works that channel the voices of plants, animals, and musical divas. She is also the director of the Center for Deep Listening. Welcome, Professor Loveless.
Thank you. I am delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you here. Our paths have crossed many, many times over the various deep listening events that both of us have attended and that you have sometimes organized. And it's so nice to have the opportunity to speak with you in person, both about your work and about the Institute.
Mm, mm,
So I
yeah.
was interested in starting out with
Mm,
the topic, since the topic of the podcast is listening, and listening is such a deep topic. I was wondering how you think about listening.
mm, mm. It is indeed a deep topic, um, pun not intended. How do I think about listening? I think about it in so many ways, and I think that it is such a constant and multi-layered part of our everyday lives, what we call listening, because we use this word in a lot of ways. I think of listening in the sonic sense, right? So sonic attention, sonic awareness, sonic interest, sonic composition, sonic observing. Um, and that includes, of course, the sounds of everyday life as they're occurring and the sounds that, we might make on purpose and call music. Um,
Mhm.
and the sounds of voices. But then when I think of listening, it includes all of that, but it's broader and is a mode of attending and attention that includes the sonic, but also the more than sonic. And that's something that I have learned from deep listening, but is also just the way that listening is used in our language as well, right? You listen to your body, and we don't mean listen to the sounds of your body necessarily. We mean pause and slow down and pay attention.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Nice. Very, very nice. And, because you're obviously a professor, but
Mhm,
also an artist who makes sound-based works,
mhm,
how does listening inform your works?
mm. Yeah. It is very much at the core of my work. And um, so, for example, a body of work that that I've been in that I've been pursuing for maybe 15 years, maybe.
Oh my, my.
This body of work involves listening to the voices of others, often other species, animal species, plant species, and sort of trying to listen to their sounds not only with my ears, but through reperforming those sounds. So, kind of like embodying them or having them move through me physically as I sing or
Mm,
vocalize. And then I turn those sounds that I produce with my voice into compositions. But it really does all come out of practices of listening in the world, maybe making recordings or finding recordings, and then maybe often stretching those out, elongating them so that my ear can hear more detail within the sound, and then finding ways to translate that then out to others. So it's kind of like a process of listening and translating. But yeah, all of my creative work and my creative impulses start with practices of listening. Absolutely.
I love this idea of listening to plants and
Mm,
animals and other species that are not human.
mhm,
Um, and I assume that also includes insects and other creatures that
mm,
make
mhm,
sounds. Um, so what I am curious about is that when you listen to plants, for example, I've seen some constructions where people take mics and attach them to the leaves of plants
mhm,
to record the sounds of the plant. And I was wondering what can be picked up
mm,
and
mm,
what do you hear from a plant, for example? Because most of us are commonly are aware of other animals and insects and those sounds that they make, but most of us are not aware of plants.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think that the kind of works that you're talking about might be the ones where people attach maybe electrodes to plant leaves and then um, sort of read the data of the signal of the subtle changes in electric charge, and then translate those into sound. Um, So my plant-based work has thus far been exclusively tree oriented. And so in that case, I'm listening to the sound of wind moving through
Mm,
branches.
mm, mm,
Um, but and so yeah, that is the kind of the sonic susurration is the word for that, the word for the sound of wind moving through the leaves of trees. I love that word. So I listen to different kinds of susurrations of different species, and different species have characteristic susurration, which is something that I was inspired to think about through the work of the Austrian artist Peter Ablinger, who made an album of just the recordings of wind through different species of trees, and they each have a different kind of a white noise.
oh,
And the artist Peter Ablinger is really interested in this kind of noise. Uh,
mm-hmm,
and um, so that is the sound, but then again, as I was saying, the listening is more than sonic. So
mm-hmm,
it's really
mm-hmm,
also about attempts at or movements toward relationship building, maybe,
mm-hmm.
or coming to know, maybe learning about. the different species, um, and sort of being allowing the listening to become imaginative and creative. So that might involve bringing myself to a place where I'm imagining or getting a sense of the different kind of temporality that different species have, the kind of temporality that a tree experiences. And I guess part of the impetus for that body of work, for that project of listening with non-humans, was a sense of you despair or um, mm, a sense that the human culture that I was raised into and participating in was in very many ways not doing a good job at, cohabitating and caring for each other and the planet at large. And so this idea of maybe learning other ways of being felt attractive to me.
Nice, nice. Um, it. I had all these questions that kept on popping into my mind, and I
Mm.
keep on writing these notes down to myself. Don't forget to ask about this, that, and the other thing. And I just got completely lost in your story.
Oh, that's nice.
It's so nice, so
Lost with
nice.
me.
Well, let's see. I think I want to go back to the susurration
Mm,
part because I was wondering. I was imagining how you would capture that. Do you make it your uh, an effort? Do you make an effort to travel around to different tree populations?
mm,
And I was imagining you flying all over the world,
mm,
searching for the best birch
mhm.
forest or the best
Mhm.
whatever forest. Do you do that kind of work?
I not exactly. I There was a moment where I was um really wanting to spend some time with the oldest tree in New York State, but that never happened.
Hmm.
At the moment, I'm actually working on a piece for the Momentum Biennial in Norway.
Mm-hmm.
And for that piece, I'm beginning to spend time with the Norway maple, also sometimes called European maple. And this is a tree that is considered invasive here in New York, in the Northeast in general, and is indigenous to Europe and to Norway, after which it's named in English. And so in this case, I'm going to be creating compositions based on listening practices with the um, Norway maple here, who's a kind of a settler that has displaced indigenous populations. And I'm going to be just listening to the tree as a practice of learning. Maybe I guess I'm hoping for some kind of experiential insight into how to best contribute and respectfully be as a settler here where I am in upstate New York. And then I will be working with and bringing these sounds to the trees in their home in Norway and present
So are you
that.
planning to play the sounds of the New York Norway maple to the maple the New to the Norway maple?
I'm not sure exactly what I will be doing yet. I'm still in the early listening stages, so
Oh, nice.
I will probably be doing some singing too, and with the Norway maples here and in Norway.
So that comes back to the embodiment topic that you were mentioning about where you, so can you explain a little bit how that whole process operates?
I can. I will. I can talk about an earlier tree project, which is the kind of Canadian maple that I worked with in 2013. And in that case, the process involved um, just spending time with maple trees in Montreal, doing readings and research, and then listening back in the studio um, to to recordings, and I would just sing with the recordings for hours and hours on end.
Mm.
And I remember it becoming really clear to me in a physical embodied way how my voice was sort of the wind of the world moving through my body, and the sounds that I was singing along with were the wind of the world moving through the body of the tree, and that created a kind of a feeling of kinship, right? Of the way that the wind is shaped by different shapes, and then creates different tones and textures. And for that piece, I ended up focusing on different frequency bands and singing along with them separately, and then putting them all back together in different forms to make the final composition.
Oh, how beautiful.
Yeah.
Hmm. So when I imagine wind blowing through trees, I
Mm-hmm.
often imagine it blowing through the tops of the trees where there are lots of branches and leaves.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look up at the tops of trees, there's these areas where there are gaps in between where the branches almost reach out to another branch and almost touch it. And mathematically, that's been defined that those whole gaps between the leaves and the branches and the limbs,
Mm-hmm.
and when they're moving with the wind and creating this susurration, do you associate anything acoustically that you can identify that associates with the spaces in between that define the air pockets, I guess?
Can you repeat the question? I am not a mathematical person.
No, no, no. I don't expect you to be. Okay, I'm thinking about the spaces
Yeah.
in in the tree, in between the branches and the leaves,
Yes.
and that's where the wind blows through. Of
Yes.
course, it hits the leaves, and everything bends and shapes according to the force of the wind, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering if, and it impacts these little tiny caverns
Yes.
or pockets, maybe, if you will,
Yeah.
between the different parts of the tree.
Yes.
So I guess, are you able to identify something very specific about those spaces, or is it a more generalized kind of impact that you perceive?
Yeah, I think that it is both more generalized and also more intuitive, or it has been thus far. So, in that particular piece that I'm thinking of, I was just sort of looking at a spectrogram and seeing where there seemed to be a little bit more concentration of frequencies, and so that kind of dictated how I cut the frequency bands that I would then sing along with. But it's I was also then singing along actually with the gust of wind, right? And how it like began and developed and rose and fell. And so, in a way, it's just an excuse to spend time with trees and an excuse to think about trees and an excuse to sing and maybe make a tree-like song that maybe is in my version of a tree-like language.
That's just so beautiful, though, because I have a passion for trees also.
Mm,
And I don't know, well, I was raised in California, but I used to go to the mountains and go backpacking and mountaineering in the mountains of California. And maybe that established my love for trees, but they have such an enormous presence in our lives and in our world. And I just love them for their presence.
yeah, yeah. They give an enormous amount. They always it's silly to say, but whenever I spend time with a tree, one of the feelings that I end up leaving with is one of benevolence, or maybe the tree inspires my own benevolence. Um, yeah.
Of course, I have another question for you, but I think you've kind of answered it.
Mm.
Do you have a listening practice in general?
Hmm. Yeah, I could probably answer that in a few ways. I you know, I began participating in or studying deep listening in 2005. So
Hmm.
it's coming up on that 20-year anniversary. So that's quite a long time. And if we think about Pauline Oliveros's um, definition or sort of challenge to herself to listen to everything at all times in all possible ways, um, as much as possible,
Hmm.
that's been influencing me, for a long time. So I do think there's a way that my life has become shaped by listening in certain ways. It's just changed how I listen. Um, but then, um, a practice really has to do with something. I think of a practice as something that's kind of intentional and repeated. And so maybe where it becomes more of a practice for me is in any moment where I feel like I need to ground myself a little bit, connect a little bit more, maybe calm myself. So I do use um, Pauline's listening meditation, sort of my version of it as I learned from her, right? Just a sort of opening to a sort of an inclusive listening awareness in 360 degrees, which for me always it feels like it opens the pores of all of my senses
Hmm.
and really connects me in a rich way to my surroundings and myself. So that's something that I sort of turn to in moments throughout, the day or the week or the month. And then my listening practice is, as I've said, really at the base of my creative practice. So, for example, I've been very slowly building a sort of creative project, but also a research project on an empty lot beside my house. And it's just started with like sitting and listening and just sitting and sort of doing nothing with no expectations and no agenda, maybe a timer set, and just sitting and listening and being. And it's just the most delicious, ecstatic excuse for a kind of an overbusy person like myself to just notice and hear little buzzings and rustlings and the light bouncing off of a speck of water on a blade of grass, and the way that the sounds of the cars are ricocheting across buildings or voices in the distance. I feel like there's a kind of a learning that happens for me when I'm opening up to when I'm slowing myself down and opening up to my surroundings, that is Well, it's multi-dimensional, I would say, and then, creative works can come out of that and writing can come out of that, but it's also like learning as a kind of a whole human being.
And also, it's time-based.
Mm.
So every time you go out, your
Yeah.
experience will be different
Yes.
and it will be cumulative because the times before have informed you in one way, and you will probably go through a process of comparison and
Mm-hmm.
think about what new sounds have occurred or which ones have disappeared based on the time of the day. Oh,
Yeah.
and the season, of course, the seasons change everything.
Yeah, and it's time-based in the moment as well because it's an unfolding,
Hmm.
you know, experience.
Hmm.
Yeah, it is. I actually started studying in film first in undergrad, not sound, but those are both time-based media, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you have a very, very deep, what I consider a very deep um, connection to music and sound because I noticed in your bio that you have not one, but two MFAs, one from Bard and one from Rensselaer Polytechnic that you took simultaneously.
Yes. Yes. I did that. That was a little maybe a little bit silly, but I was just
No,
really
no, no. I'm curious about your overall experience.
mm.
Is it correct to assume they were first, is it correct to assume that they were in music?
My MFA at Bard College was indeed in music/sound, they call it.
Uh-huh.
And at RPI, it was the Electronic Arts MFA. And so that was interdisciplinary, although I worked mostly in sound.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the each approach had to be quite different, but they ended up funneling you to the topic of sound.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, they were synergistic, I would say.
And is that where you discovered Pauline Oliveris's deep listening concept?
No, no. In
No.
fact, I applied for the MFA at RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, because Pauline suggested that I
Mm.
do that. So I attended two deep listening retreats in New Mexico in the summers of 2005 and 2006. And it was in the summer of 2006 that I was planning to apply to grad schools. And so then, of course, I had the opportunity to work more with Pauline and to get to know her more. But I kind of fell upon her work while I was living in Vancouver. I guess it must have been in like 2004. I find
Mm-hmm.
it very surprising that I hadn't. I did a minor, not a major, in electroacoustic music at Concordia University in Montreal, and her work was not introduced, um, and which is sort of a shame, but I'm sure it is now.
Oh, I'm sure it is now.
Mm.
Well, um, I was realizing that probably the audience is not familiar with who Pauline Oliveros is, and I thought I would make a mention that she discovered the concept and created the concept of deep listening. She was a professor at many universities, including Mills and Rensselaer Polytechnic, and I'm sure there are a couple of other ones. And during that time as a musical professor, she ended up focusing on this idea of deep listening that she developed when she and some of her colleagues went to visit and record this massive silo in Oregon.
Mhm.
At the time, they were doing it on tape, which was this big reel to reel tape recording machine, which is about this big, which is who knows how big that is. What is that, about 2 feet wide? Approximately the same height. But I'm sure that a reel to reel tape recorder must not have been light. And from my reading about it, is that they climbed down into this metal silo that was quite large and
Yes.
just made sounds to test reverberation of the silo first. And because the
Which was, I believe, a
reverberation,
42-second reverberation time, which is incredible.
yeah, yeah, which led her to think about and slowly develop the deep listening concept, which is something that people are practicing now worldwide.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, yeah, and she there's like different sort of origin points, in different stories that she told over the years, and then that of her coming to this relationship to listening that eventually she would call deep listening, and she would come to that term after ascending back out from the cistern, and making a silly pun about that was deep. That was some deep listening. Um,
Yeah, I understand she was a
Stuck
fan
with
of fun.
it. Yeah.
So the Norway maple tree piece
Mm,
is a piece that you're currently working on.
yes.
Are there additional pieces that are on your horizon?
Um, the other piece that is a work in progress, perhaps, um, is called "This Street is a Song." And so that is the work that has been coming out of my sort of years now, years long practice of sitting and listening, and thinking about sort of very local issues that have to do with the place where I live and the street where I live. And so, like, kind of many places in the United States of America, and maybe all places in the world, it has like very complicated histories, and complicated and troubled, and beautiful presence. And so I've been um, listening, doing a little bit of recording, but really much more listening than recording, and doing some sort of singing along with the sort of soundscapes more broadly, and then also writing. So
Mm,
I made a piece that involves 6 audio essays, which contain these sort of like my revocalizations of the soundscape, sort of shifting in the background, and my voice kind of musing and thinking about all of the different issues and topics that seem very vital, but that emerge from just being in one specific place and really just grounding myself there. And so then that was presented once in a gallery through sort of 6 posters that each had a little bit of text from my writing, that is kind of placed on the poster as a short score, a little text score,
mhm,
along with QR codes for my audio essays, and then a sort of a handmade speaker that I made from materials that I found
mhm,
on the lot. So it was presented that way, and then it was presented in Ireland with the audio essays um, being played through transducers that were placed on the windows of the gallery. So you would put your ear up to the window to hear my voice and the um, whispered vocalization composition. So that is an ongoing project that other kind of creative pieces or written pieces. It's also a chapter that was published in a book in 2024. Um, but that's because I live here. I'm really I'm committed to this place, and it feels important to continue to learn and integrate where I am into what I do, and then to do in relation to where I am.
mhm.
So that project is ongoing, but I'm not sure what the next bit of kind of output in the world around that might be.
So in a way, you're also embodying the community.
That I hope to be, if not embodying, perhaps listening in more of a community-oriented sense, and with the goal of really being able to listen in order to respond, and not
Mhm.
just respond ideally in artwork, but hopefully to have that line between what I consider my artwork and my life work to maybe disappear. Mhm.
Well, they're so woven together now.
Mm, mm,
It's just a beautiful world you're describing.
mm. Thank
So, yeah, so this is your work, but you are the director of the Center for Deep Listening. So, talking about, you know,
you.
embodying life and work.
Yeah. Hmm.
So, what does the director of the Center of Deep Listening do? And tell us a little bit about the center itself.
Sure, yeah. So Pauline Oliveros established the Center for Deep Listening at Rensselaer in 2014. It was sort of a 2-year process, but it became official in 2014. And what the center does is it was created to sort of take over much of the work that the Deep Listening Institute was doing.
Hmm.
Much, but not all. So, for example, you know, the Center for Deep Listening doesn't sort of doesn't hold the copyrights to any of her work or her writings or her recordings. What we do is we steward the practice of deep listening itself, and so we do that through teaching. So the center sort of organizes and runs the introductory courses that we teach, the intensives that we teach, which lead to a certification to teach deep listening. Right, so this is a way of having the practice continue to be a living practice. And so it's important that the center is not just kind of rotely memorizing some things that were written at some time, or the way that things were taught a certain year. There's a large group of facilitators, most of whom worked with Pauline directly, and who continue to kind of develop the curriculum in a way that makes sense in the current moment. So yeah, so we steward the teaching, the ongoing teaching of deep listening, and the teaching of the teachers of deep listening, and then that also sort of leads into just supporting community in different ways. So supporting people in leading their own workshops, having public lectures, finding ways for deep listening aficionados or teachers to be in community and in contact with each other. And we just put out a book, which is a collection of 365 scores for listening, one of which is your beautiful score. And yeah, so that's like over 300 authors, kind of listening contributions, all brought together in a
And
book
the,
that
the
was
title
celebrated.
of the book is,
Is A Year of Deep Listening, 365 Text Scores for Pauline Oliveros. And that's what it is. Yeah.
I was so excited when I got my copy. I was going, look at it's really real. It actually exists.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people have, I was following its evolution, and through
Mm,
the year, we would have the stream of information that was drifting about the development of the book, and people were making their contributions. And the idea, and actually, I have to step back a step, which is I understand one of Pauline Oliveras' focus was to create a community.
yes.
And this book does this so well.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah, it really the impetus for the original project, which at first it was one score a day posted online,
Hmm.
for the year of what would have been her 90th birthday. So it was all sort of like a birthday present or a celebration of her work and her legacy. Um, but but yeah, so I think because it started that way, it really had that intention of sort of forwarding and celebrating her spirit. And so I think, that's the spirit that people like yourself contributed scores in. That's the way that they were woven together. There was an Indiegogo campaign to support the book
Hmm.
publication, so the community kind of came together in that way. So yeah, it really, really was a community project. And in fact, since there are so many authors, different people who were involved in the book in different ways are having their own kind of like launch performances, performing scores from the book, kind of all over the world. It's really beautiful, and I love that it's kind of owned by the community.
Oh, that's so gorgeous.
Yeah.
Well, we've covered what you do as an artist, what you do as a professor, and also as the director of the Center for Deep Listening, and about the book, one of the latest projects you've done. So, was there anything else you wanted to tell us about that we didn't cover, or anything that's upcoming?
Mm, I'm thinking. Um, no, except, I mean, it's a real pleasure to speak with you and to share with you. And I just love this whole series that you've been creating and putting into the world.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. It's been really, really exciting. In my series, what I'm interested in listening to others and their viewpoints, like yourself, your
Mm,
viewpoint of how it impacts your world on an individual basis. And as you know, I'm talking to so many different people from different walks of life who not, some of them don't, maybe a number of them don't really think about listening as a part of their world, but as I walk them through the idea of listening in the world, all of a
mm,
sudden these wonderful stories come out
mm,
about, like, for example, I was thinking about in my interview with Alvin Ing, who
mm,
is a Chinese American author.
mhm,
And he was raised in a Chinese laundry. His parents had a Chinese laundry.
mm,
And so I was very, very curious about this whole idea of Chinese laundries because I thought that they were long gone. And
mm,
he was telling stories about listening inside of the laundry and what that was like because it's this bicultural
mm,
sonification.
mm,
Um, and that led to this wonderful story about how his grandfather, he understood many years later that his grandfather had died in New York from an opium overdose.
mm,
Um, and how he was reflecting on how in the early formation of laundries in their nascence, which was around the gold rush era, that these individually owned businesses, they would have their food on a string hanging over where they worked. They would nibble off the string because they couldn't take out the time
mm.
to take pause for a meal.
Wow.
And then he jumped to the reflection of the fact that, well, at the time, opium was wrapped around string, and that's how people ate opium was by sucking on the string. So he took the string theory to the opium, and then he said, I wonder if that is how the concept of strung out came out.
Mm.
And, you can't make up these scenarios. And it was just like a jump of thoughts that occurred as we were talking.
Mm. Beautiful. Yeah, through the space of listening that you created.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's so
So
good.
so it's exciting for me to hear all these wonderful stories about my friend Timothy Meyer's experience as being a conductor, for example, and communicating and listening to his orchestra and
Mm.
communicating to them non-verbally. And he talks about how his motion, he realizes a slight shrug in the shoulder
Mm.
would create a different impact than, if he slunk down.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
And that kind of embodiment
Yeah,
of motion and communication while
yeah,
listening is
yeah.
really a fascinating thing to think about. So, when I think more and more about listening, the topic gets bigger and bigger and more individualized and, and time based and fascinating in that way.
Yeah, I actually, there's another book that I have that I've co-edited with three other editors that's coming out this year as well. And that's called Situated Listening, Attending to the Unheard. And it is, yeah, just a collection of texts by different scholars and artists, all taking sort of different approaches and examining different facets of listening. And it is indeed um, so layered and kind of endlessly fascinating, or I guess maybe for people like us.
I think what it comes down to is that all of us humans have ears,
Mm,
and um, our ears are always on.
mm, mm,
It's a matter of whether or not we choose to pay attention to what is received through our ears. And I've discovered if I just talk to somebody about their process of listening
mm,
or take them on a sound walk,
mm,
I mean, they find it totally illuminating.
mm,
It's so rewarding
mhm.
to just say, oh, just, you don't even have to turn anything on. There's no technology involved. You just have to pay attention.
Just pay attention. It's amazing. It's
Yeah.
amazing. It's so magical, and it does feel like um, you know the cliche of like now more than ever. I hate to use, but it does feel as though increasingly and increasingly our culture, and this is something that I see in my students. Like on the one hand, things are going more and more quickly, and our attention is being monetized more and more aggressively, um, and sort of sought after and kind of stolen from us. And at the same time, people are seeking more and more and more kind of practices that can um, combat that or provide an alternative. Um,
Mhm. Yeah, I'm seeing that starting to bubble up myself.
mhm,
People are starting the question of how do you form your own personal resistance?
mm, mm,
Was a question that came up just a few days ago, and I thought, I think this is indicating something that's important that's people
mm,
cannot yet vocalize, but is happening,
mm,
and people are feeling it's necessary
mhm,
instead of tightening up their muscles and
mm.
being tense and being anxious. Having an alternative is a really important thing to think about. to give ourselves time to pause, because humans need to have time to pause and time to relax,
Mm-hmm.
even before they think.
Mm-hmm. I attended a presentation by the Lakota artist Suzanne Kite a few months ago, I think it was only. And she was talking about how she came to be focusing on dreams in her current work, and the way that she articulated it was that she started to think, um, you know, it was something like, how can we find time to rest? And if we can't rest, then how can we dream? And I found that,
Oh, that's so right. That's so right.
yeah, we need actually that rest, whether the rest is literally sleeping or just stopping and being with our bodies, or breathing, or doing nothing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? I think of the nap ministry, and rest is resistance, right? So all of this is kind of like this relatively recent kind of groundswell of resistance to social media and grind culture, and the constant anxiety, which doesn't actually allow us to resist in the deep ways that we need to, both within ourselves and also out in the world.
You know, we're coming to the end of our time together. So
Mhm.
I wanted to thank you so, so much for all of your wonderful thoughts about listening.
Mhm.
And I look forward to our next opportunity to
I do
talk.
as well. I do as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephanie Loveless.
Thank you, China Blue. Hmm, great.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Listening with China Blue. I hope it inspires you to build your own listening practice. This begins as a daily practice of attentively listening without judgment. And ask yourself, what is your version of silence? If you want to learn more about me and my work, go to chinablueart.com, and please follow me on Facebook and at Instagram. Thank you.